Is everything all right? I gasped in horror as I stepped into my son's home. The scene that unfolded before me was deeply disturbing. My 5-year-old grandson, Ethan, who had been missing for days, was found chained and visibly malnourished. Scattered around the room were empty bread bags and discarded plastic bottles. He looked frail and weak, yet when I tried to provide him with water, he insisted, "Give it to my sister first." Confused, I asked, "Your sister? Who is she?" From a corner of the room, the weak cry of an infant answered my question, unveiling a shocking and painful truth. Determined to seek justice for my grandchildren's suffering, I vowed to punish those responsible for this unimaginable neglect. "Are you asking for money again?" I questioned my son, Noah, over the phone, my voice laden with frustration. It had been 3 years since my husband passed away at the age of 62, and ever since then, I had lived alone. Thankfully, my husband's substantial inheritance had kept me financially secure, but my concern had shifted to Noah. Despite being an adult, he had proven to be quite irresponsible. He constantly brought work home, overslept, and exhibited a poor work ethic. His career was characterized by numerous job changes, punctuated by his constant financial requests, much to my disappointment. But the bond of family prevented me from turning my back on him entirely. Unexpectedly one day, Noah came home with a woman and announced, "Mom, I'm going to marry this girl." I greeted the young woman with a polite smile. "Hi, I'm Julia. It's nice to meet you," she said with a grin. "Nice to meet you too, Julia, but getting married so suddenly? I'm surprised," I replied, still processing the abruptness of the announcement. Noah, casually chewing gum, chuckled and added, "Well, what can you do when you get pregnant?" Julia gently touched her belly and revealed, "I'm 4 months pregnant." Although taken aback, I congratulated them with a strained smile as I saw my son and his new fiancée off. Despite the joy of expecting a grandchild, I couldn't help but harbor doubts about their ability to raise a child properly. After some time, I visited Noah and Julia at their home. What greeted me was pure chaos. The house looked as if it had been burglarized, with empty meal containers from convenience stores and noodle cups scattered all over the place. "What on earth is this mess?" I exclaimed. "Julia, are you eating properly? It's not just your body now, you're carrying a child." I had brought some fresh vegetables and suggested, "Shall we cook together?" In response, my pregnant daughter-in-law made a face and retorted, Cooking is such a hassle." As I began to explain the importance of proper nutrition, Noah sharply interrupted, "An annoying mother-in-law who nags all the time won't be appreciated, you know. Stop picking on my wife." Despite my good intentions, Julia dismissed the vegetables, handing them back to me. "I don't need this," she said coldly. "And please, stop making unnecessary comments. You're seriously annoying." Faced with their harsh criticism, I had no choice but to leave quietly that day, heart-heavy with concern. Eventually, Julia gave birth, and they both brought the baby to meet me. As I looked at my newborn grandchild wrapped in a soft blanket, my expression softened. "How adorable. It's a boy, right? What's his name?" "His name is Ethan," Noah replied, before quickly changing the subject. "Mom, do you have something to give us?" "Oh, yes, of course," I said, handing over an envelope. Julia snatched it quickly and eagerly opened it. "Noah, there's $1,300 in here," she exclaimed with a broad grin. My son smiled and said, "Awesome. Maybe I'll treat myself to something nice." I attempted to persuade them to use the money for the baby, but it was clear they weren't listening. Instead, Noah turned to me and said, "Mom, we're thinking of moving into your vacant house. Our current place is getting cramped, especially with Ethan now." I had recently moved from the house I shared with my late husband to a smaller apartment, and I hadn't yet decided whether to sell or rent the house. Raising children requires space and resources, so the idea of letting them live there seemed reasonable. I nodded in agreement. "I understand. You don't have to pay rent. Just take care of the place." Noah thanked me with a quick "Thanks, Mom." We'll move in next month, but Julia added, but please don't come to our house unannounced. We need our privacy. I was taken aback, but replied softly, I understand. From that point on, I was only able to visit when I had urgent matters to discuss. Occasionally, I would contact them to share food or ask about Ethan. During those visits, they reluctantly allowed me to meet him, but it was clear that they preferred to keep their distance. Nonetheless, my grandson was growing well and had even started calling me Grandma. Just before Ethan turned 4, as usual, I contacted them, offering to bring him a snack. However, this time, I received a message from Noah saying, Julia doesn't want to see you anymore. We've changed the locks, so you can't come in. Surprised and hurt by this sudden and one-sided decision, I tried to reason with myself. Perhaps I had unintentionally offended Julia without realizing it, so I decided to give them space for a while. But over time, my visits gradually stopped. Occasionally, when I contacted Noah, his responses were brief and dismissive. Despite my growing concerns, I continued living my solitary life. Then, one day, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end said, I'd like to request repayment of your son's debt. Shocked, I learned that Noah had independently listed me as a co-signer on a loan. Although I had helped him financially before, I had never anticipated something like this. I immediately tried to contact Noah, but he didn't respond to my calls or messages. Frustrated and worried, I went to their house, but no one answered the door. After days of trying to reach them, I began to worry that they had disappeared. I checked with Noah's workplace, only to find out that he had quit. The neighbors knew nothing either. A whole week had passed since I first visited the house, so I decided to report them missing to the police. One day, after another failed attempt to contact them, I returned to their house. I repeatedly pressed the intercom button, but there was still no answer. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a faint thud from inside. It was as if something had shifted. Desperate, I called out, Is anyone in there? Show yourself, please. There was no response, but the sound inside piqued my curiosity. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The garden-side casement window was slightly ajar. With trepidation, I entered the house, only to be met with a sight that made me scream in horror. My 5-year-old grandson, Ethan, was crouched on the floor, chained to a radiator. His frail body trembled as I rushed to his side. Are you okay, sweetheart? I exclaimed, my heart pounding. The room reeked of decay, and around Ethan lay empty bread bags and scattered plastic bottles. His voice was barely audible when he whispered, Grandma, did you come to rescue me? What is happening here? I gasped, quickly fetching some water. As I tried to give it to him, he cried out, Give it to my sister first. Your sister? Who's your sister? I asked, confused. At that moment, a weak cry echoed from the corner of the room. I turned to see a baby, no more than 3 months old, lying in a makeshift bed. My shock was so great that I dropped the cup I was holding. Desperate to help, I quickly unfastened Ethan's chain, scooped up the baby, and rushed both children to my car. I drove straight to the hospital, praying that it wasn't too late. At the hospital, doctors examined the children and confirmed that both were suffering from severe malnutrition. Ethan had clearly been caring for his baby sister, Sophie, all by himself. The situation was more dire than I had imagined. When the doctor inquired about the circumstances, I could only shake my head. I hadn't been involved in Noah and Julia's lives for so long that I had no idea how things had gotten this bad. Ethan and Sophie were admitted to the hospital, and soon after, the police arrived. They questioned me about Noah and Julia's whereabouts, but I could offer little information. I had no idea where they had gone or when they might return. Later, after calming down, Ethan explained that his parents had gone abroad, leaving him to care for Sophie. They told me to stay tethered to her, so I wouldn't run away, he said, his voice trembling. Shocked and horrified by what my grandson had endured, I held him tightly, vowing to protect him and Sophie from further harm. When I returned to the house to collect their belongings, I found a travel brochure for an overseas cruise. As I flipped through it, a piece of paper fell out, revealing that Noah and Julia had financed their trip by borrowing money, with me as the co-signer. They had abandoned their children to go on a lavish vacation, and the realization filled me with fury. 3 days later, I watched from the shadows as Noah and Julia returned home, pulling their large suitcases behind them. They were laughing and chatting about how much fun they had on the trip. "That was amazing, Noah," Julia exclaimed. "We should do it again soon." But as they turned the corner and saw their belongings stacked outside, they froze. "What the hell is going on here?" Noah muttered in disbelief. I stepped out from behind the corner and confronted them. "Did you enjoy your trip?" Noah looked shocked and exclaimed, "What the hell is this? What's going on, Mom?" I couldn't hold back my anger. "Was your overseas trip worth it, Noah? Did you enjoy abandoning your children?" Both Noah and Julia recoiled in surprise, but quickly tried to defend themselves. "Didn't we tell you not to come near our house?" Julia snapped. I sighed. If I hadn't been made a co-signer, I wouldn't have interfered. But when I saw that window open, I couldn't resist. "This house is in my name, after all. Is there a problem?" Julia's face paled. "Wait, where are the kids? Let us see them," she exclaimed. "The children are in the hospital," I replied. "They were severely malnourished. By the time I found them, they had run out of food and water." Julia and Noah stared at me in disbelief. "They're alive, so what's the big deal?" Noah said dismissively. "Now, what about the house?" "I've decided to sell it," I declared. "You two aren't fit to live here." Noah erupted in anger. "This is our home. You can't just throw us out." "I have no intention of letting anyone who abandoned their children live here. Pack your things and leave," I said coldly. At that moment, the distant wail of a police siren drew closer. Julia's face drained of color. "Noah, what should we do? Are we going to get arrested?" Noah, his voice filled with false cheerfulness, turned to me and pleaded, "Mom, please smooth things over for us." Convinced the police were innocent, we promised to do better. Resolute, I shook my head. "No, today I sever all family ties. What you've done to your children is unforgivable. Reflect on your actions." Julia and Noah slumped in defeat as the police arrived and took them into custody. Later, Noah and Julia were found guilty of child neglect and abandonment. I took legal action and obtained full custody of Ethan and Sophie. They are my responsibility now, and despite the challenges, raising them brings me great joy. Ethan helps with household chores, and Sophie has started to talk. Every day is busy, but my grandchildren give me the strength to keep going. Though Noah and Julia now live in a rundown apartment far away, unable to find steady employment due to the media coverage of their case, I have no sympathy for them. My focus is on giving Ethan and Sophie the love and care they deserve. Thanks to them, every day is fulfilling, and I will continue to cherish them for the rest of my life.